Coaching individual conflict. This includes coaching the person to overcome conflict and potentially your ability to coach somebody who's struggling with conflict, which inherently has a little bit of conflict within it. As you go through this micro module, really open your mind to the opportunity and the value of handling conflict. So let's take a define and coach strategy. Again, define and coach is where you define what something is along with the actions and the attributes that support that definition. A person's ability and willingness to approach someone else for the opportunity to build awareness of where they gave an opportunity to improve and to gain clarity as to why some things may be occurring. Confronting is not always filled with yelling and screaming and bloodshed. Now, I know that's a little theatrical. Confronting is about building awareness. Now, this may not be your definition, and that's okay. Think about a definition that suits you and your culture and your team. Once you define something, you have things that you can coach to. For example, ability. Can you describe how somebody should confront somebody professionally and thoughtfully? What is their willingness to improve? Are they willing to practice? How do they approach someone in a non-intimidating way? How do you get them in a frame of mind to approach someone opportunistically and not emotionally? That's why these words are highlighted. Think about your definition and it will suit you extremely well. So again, knowledge. What is the definition? What are the attributes that support that definition? Skill. This is not rocket science, and I repeat this all the time. If you do not practice something, you will not arbitrarily get better at it. You have to facilitate conversations of practice. Behavioral. Confidence in confronting someone takes practice and positive reinforcement. Initially, when people start practicing, they will not do it perfectly, and that's okay. The process of practice will help them become better and more amenable to actually doing it. So, quick story. Manager years ago was in a board meeting and would rarely, if ever, speak up. And after the meeting, she would send out emails to people within the company complaining about the group, complaining about the decisions being made, complaining about the decision-making process, but she never spoke up. And so we approached this person, and we had shared the visibility of the emails. And you could tell she was sheepish and embarrassed. And we asked, help us understand. Instead of confronting and yelling and screaming like she may have thought was going to occur, we asked her, help me understand, why are you choosing really, perception-wise, a very passive approach to working with your teammates than speaking up? Now, on the surface, the perception being created up to this point was rude, backstabbing, condescending, non-team-like. She ended up sharing a story of a prior organization and a prior boss that she worked for. And one time she actually spoke up and she really got belittled in front of the group. So the group setting became the sanctuary of absolute fear and being terrified. So I think about the word fear and I think about frightened, to engage, ask, or respond. This was exactly who she was. Great person. Great ideas, by the way. And what we all assumed was she was a backstabber. She was not a backstabber. She was terrified to speak up. That's why we confront people. There's always something more there than what we know or expect. So here's our areas of focus. Why do we do it? How do we do it? Our objective is to understand the person, develop your ability, be aware of your approach. And here's a big one. Make sure you're cultivating people's reception of conflict. And remember, we have to follow up. Confronting someone is not a conversation. It could be a series of conversations woven together. So why do we do it? We talk about trust and honesty all the time. Now let's be blunt. Being honest is tough. If somebody comes to you and says, am I doing a great job? And let's say you're really struggling, you're not in the frame of mind, and you say to somebody, yeah, I think you're doing pretty good. And you know in your heart they're not doing even average work. You just lost trust and integrity. In the moment, it got you through it. And so there's an old cliche that we share. Be brutally honest. Don't be honest to be brutal. That takes time. So often we get put in precarious positions as leaders. So knowledge, how do we do it? Skill, have we practiced? Behavioral, are we confident? I go back to a typical setting. When someone is in a staff meeting being interruptive and disruptive, where do you confront that person? 9 times out of 10, when I ask that question, people will say, oh, I would wait till after the meeting. Because that's a big stage. Everybody's eyes are on you. It's somewhat of a bold move. Yet here's the opposite viewpoint. If you don't confront somebody who's interruptive and disruptive, you might be running the risk of losing the other people in that meeting who are wondering, why is he or she not handling this situation? So again, how do we do it comes into where, when, and how we go about approaching somebody. Remember, we have to understand our people. Are they arrogant or are they insecure? Are they confident or scared? Do they have something in their past that's really inhibiting them, much like the earlier story of speaking up in the moment? Our goal is to help people gain perspective, and we can share observations. One of the things that we encourage people to do is a journaling activity. Have people journal times they should have spoken up or will speak up. When you think about a course of a business day, let's just call it a typical 8 to 5, 8-hour business day. Think about that. How many times during the day do we have to be really honest with someone or have to disagree or confront a premise or a thought premise? It's probably 2 or 3 times a day. So again, I'm not saying we go out and look for those opportunities to do that, but be aware that we have to understand our people. And again, our ability goes back to one fundamental rule that we encourage all companies to adopt. It is the number one reason we have water cooler conversations and rumors. We don't go to the source. This should be in every mission statement of an organization. When in conflict, you must first and only go to the source. I cannot tell you how many times in the corporate world somebody will tell 2 or 3 people that in their mind they think they can trust explicitly, only to have those 2 or 3 people tell 2 or 3 other people. And it gets back to the person, the source. At that point, the relationship has probably been destroyed. Most people say, well, we have to rebuild our trust. Sometimes that never happens when that occurs. We say it like a cliche. You have to go to the source. Doesn't mean you're comfortable. Doesn't mean you're confident. Yet when you go to the source, you insulate yourself from other people's viewpoints and perspectives. Know your objective. I always share with people, the objective of confronting should always have 2 words in it: thoughtful and professional. I'm going to confront Gary thoughtfully and professionally. And when I do that, guess what happens? My approach is a lot more amenable. It's a lot more accepting. Then, when you're approaching someone, if you're nervous or apprehensive or anxious, use a permission-based question. Gary, would you mind if I shared with you where I think we have an opportunity to work more in congruence with one another? The sword. And so I don't make assumptions, Gary. I want to certainly open up the conversation from your viewpoint, because maybe I've made some assumptions along the way. You throw yourself on the sword. I'm approaching you because of me, not you. What happens? A more thoughtful conversation occurs. Practice. Know your intentional awareness. Practice the permission question. Practice throwing yourself on the sword. When we practice things, we become more acclimated to actually doing them. It's much like public speaking. If you don't practice and someone says, we're going to have 500 people, do you want to speak today? Most people would say no, because it's terrifying to them. train your people, coach your people on the reception of conflict. I always go back to the fundamental premise. Coaching's a two-way street, so is conflict. How we give it is typically how somebody delivers it. If we lead with emotion and conviction and anger and disruption in our voice, someone is not going to hug and kiss you and say thank you. Yet if we teach people how to receive conflict, and you know that sometimes we're going to be the source of conflict, which is okay, we've now positioned our people to have very thoughtful and professional conversations. Again, follow up. When you have a conversation of conflict, and let's say it doesn't go well, and guess what? Some will not go well. As good as you might be, some will not go well. It's okay to follow up and say, Gary, I know the conversation we had last week was kind of tough. I don't know if I handled it perfectly. I'm sure I did not. And I just want to continue because I'm still committed. Remember, when we're confronting people, we're typically asking them to change or do something different. Now, here's a little bit of humor. Most people don't walk into the boss's office and say, boss, I'm stagnant. I need some uncomfortable change. So when we're confronting someone, we're building awareness of something that's uncomfortable. So don't go into the conversation assuming, well, I'm going to do this. It's all or nothing. It doesn't have to be that. It can be more than one conversation. And again, think about collaboration. What's your objective? What's your intentional awareness? If it's to win, you will be in conflict. If you don't get your way and you withdraw, that says something about your character and your leadership. So again, we want to be accommodating. We want to have a win-win scenario whenever we can. Yet so often, broiled in conflict is winning and losing. And so often we are so steadfast in winning, guess what happens? We lose sight of what the other person's even saying. In summary, conflict does build up over time. It rarely dissipates. If somebody did something that was disruptive in a presentation you were giving, and they really undermined your authority and were giggling and laughing, if you avoid that, you have given permission for that to continue. I'm not condoning the behavior, yet I don't condone silence as a strategy to solve things. Conflict also labels people. The way you handle it will become a part of your leadership brand. Again, when we're coaching and when we're conversing and when we're building awareness and commonality of our teammates, guess what happens to conflict? It becomes more palatable to be executed. It's not as hard because we have a foundation. Yet so often conflict gets taken so out of context because we don't even know the other person. Our only frame of reference is the work discord. Spend some time getting to know your people and it will serve you very well.